Please help me." The words formed silently in the autumn air, shaped only by trembling hands that no one around seemed to understand. 26-year-old Savannah Blake stood frozen on the sidewalk outside Henderson's Corner grocery, her heart pounding so violently against her ribs that she could feel the vibration in her throat. The evening had painted Ashford, Tennessee in shades of amber and gold, the kind of picture-perfect autumn sunset that usually made her smile. But tonight, the beauty felt like a cruel joke, because 20 feet behind her, standing in the shadow of a flickering street lamp, was the man who had been turning her life into a waking nightmare for the past 3 weeks. She had made a terrible mistake today, the kind of small, ordinary decision that seems meaningless until it becomes everything. In her rush to grab milk and bread from the corner store after a client dinner, she had left her phone charging on her nightstand. It was supposed to be a quick errand, 10 minutes, maybe 15 at most. She had been wearing her favorite red dress, a fitted piece that hugged her curves elegantly and made her feel confident and beautiful. The kind of dress you wear when you want the world to notice you in all the right ways. Her long, wavy blonde hair cascaded over her shoulders, catching the last rays of sunlight as she had walked the 4 blocks from her apartment, completely unaware that tonight would change everything. What could possibly happen in 15 minutes? Everything could happen. The moment Savannah stepped out of the grocery store with her small paper bag clutched against her chest, her blood turned to ice. He was there across the street, wearing that same gray hoodie he always wore, the one that had become a symbol of terror in her mind. Derek Vance. She had learned his name from the police report she filed last week, the one that had accomplished absolutely nothing. He was 31 years old, worked as an IT technician at some company downtown. And according to the detective who had taken her statement with barely concealed impatience, there was nothing they could do until he actually did something illegal. Apparently, standing across the street and staring was not illegal. Following someone home from work every day for 2 weeks was not illegal. Leaving unsigned notes on someone's car windshield that said things like, "I see you," and "You are so beautiful when you sleep," was not enough to warrant an arrest. Savannah had tried to explain through her interpreter and through written notes, and through every means of communication available to her, that she was in danger. She could feel it in her bones, that primal instinct that had kept humans alive for thousands of years, the one that screamed at her to run every time she saw that gray hoodie in her peripheral vision. But the police had looked at her with that particular brand of pity. That hearing people reserved for deaf people, the kind that said they thought she was confused, overreacting, perhaps not quite understanding the situation correctly. After all, how could she really know he was following her if she could not hear his footsteps? She knew. God help her. She knew. Tonight, without her phone, without any way to call for help or text for assistance or use any of the apps that connected her to the hearing world, she was completely vulnerable. And as she stood on that sidewalk, watching Derek Vance push himself off the lamppost and begin walking toward her with that slow, deliberate pace that haunted her dreams, she realized with horrifying clarity that he knew it too. He had been watching her. He had seen her leave her apartment without her phone. He had been waiting. Savannah turned and walked faster, her nude heels clicking against the pavement, in a rhythm she could not hear, but could feel through the vibrations traveling up her legs. The red dress that had made her feel so confident this morning now felt like a target too bright, too noticeable, too memorable. Her blonde hair whipped in the cold autumn wind as she increased her pace, and when she risked a glance over her shoulder, her worst fears were confirmed. He was matching her speed exactly. Not running, not even hurrying, just walking with the casual confidence of a predator who knew his prey had nowhere to go. The streets of downtown Ashford were emptying as darkness crept across the sky like a slow-moving bruise. Shops were closing their owners, pulling down metal gates and locking doors, disappearing into the safety of their cars and their homes and their normal lives, where monsters like Derek Vance did not exist. Savannah could see people in the distance, couples walking hand in hand, a group of teenagers laughing at something on one of their phones, an elderly man shuffling toward the bus stop with a newspaper tucked under his arm. Any one of them could help her. Any one of them could be her salvation. If only they could understand her. Savannah's hands were shaking so badly now that she could barely hold onto her grocery bag. Her heart hammered against her ribs with such force that she imagined it was trying to escape her chest, to run ahead and find safety without her. The muscles in her legs burned with the effort of walking as fast as possible without breaking into a full run, because some instinct told her that the moment she ran, he would run too, and she was not confident she could outrun him in these heels, in this dress, with her lungs already burning from barely suppressed panic. 20 feet behind her. 15 feet. The distance was closing and the sun was setting, and somewhere in the gathering darkness a monster was smiling, because he knew that tonight, finally, he had her exactly where he wanted her. Completely alone. Completely silent. Completely trapped. Before we continue, please tell us where in the world are you tuning in from. We love seeing how far our stories travel. The young couple appeared like a mirage in the desert, like hope itself had taken human form and decided to stroll down Main Street at exactly the right moment. They were in their mid-20s, holding hands. Clearly absorbed in each other's company, the kind of couple that made strangers smile with their obvious affection. Savannah rushed toward them with desperate speed, her hands already forming words before she even reached their side. "Please help me." She signed her movements frantic and urgent. "Someone is following me. I am deaf. Please call the police. Please help me." The couple stopped walking, their faces registering surprise at being suddenly approached by a beautiful woman in a red dress who was clearly distressed. But as Savannah's hands continued to move through the air, shaping words they had never learned to read, their expressions shifted from surprise to confusion, to something far worse. Discomfort. The woman's hand tightened around her purse, pulling it closer to her body, as if Savannah might be trying to distract her for a robbery. The man shook his head apologetically, raising his own hands in a gesture of helplessness, and said something that Savannah could only partially read on his lips. "Sorry, do not understand, cannot help." And then they were walking away, hurrying, really clearly uncomfortable with the encounter, and eager to return to their private world of whispered conversations and shared laughter. Savannah watched them go, watched her hope disappear around the corner, and felt something inside her chest crack like ice on a frozen lake. She turned around. Derek Vance had stopped walking. He was standing under a streetlight now, maybe 30 feet away, and he was smiling. That terrible knowing smile that said he had witnessed the entire exchange, that he understood exactly what had happened, that he was enjoying watching her struggle and fail. Savannah forced herself to move, scanning the street for anyone else who might help. She spotted an elderly man locking up his hardware store, pulling down the metal security gate with practiced ease. She ran toward him, her heels catching on the uneven sidewalk, nearly sending her sprawling. But she caught herself and kept moving, her hands already rising before she reached him. "Please," she signed desperately. "That man is following me. Please call the police. Please help." The elderly man squinted at her. through thick glasses. His weathered face creased with concern, but also confusion. He pointed to his ear and shook his head sadly, the universal gesture, for I do not understand. Then he reached out and patted her shoulder with a kind, gnarled hand. Said something she could not read through his bushy gray mustache and turned to walk toward his car, parked in the small lot beside the store. Savannah grabbed his sleeve, pulling gently, trying to communicate through sheer desperation that something was wrong, that she needed help, that the monster standing down the street was going to hurt her if someone did not intervene. But the old man just looked at her with sad, apologetic eyes, gently freed his arm from her grip, and continued walking away. She tried to follow him, to stop him, to somehow make him understand, but a hand caught her arm, spinning her around. A woman in a power suit, maybe 40, briefcase in one hand, keys in the other, clearly on her way to her car after a long day at work. She had seen Savannah grab the old man and had intervened, probably thinking she was protecting him from a crazy person. "What do you think you are doing?" the woman demanded, her face hard with disapproval. Savannah's hands flew through the air, trying to explain, trying to communicate her terror, but the woman just stepped back, her expression shifting from anger to confusion to something that looked unsettlingly like disgust. "I do not understand what you are." The woman stopped mid-sentence, her eyes widening as she realized something. "You are deaf." Savannah nodded frantically, pointing down the street toward where Derek Vance was standing, trying to convey through gesture and expression that danger was literally watching them have this conversation. But the woman just shook her head, muttered something that included the word "crazy," and walked quickly toward the parking lot, her heels clicking a retreat that Savannah could feel through the sidewalk but could not hear. Alone again. Tears were streaming down Savannah's face, now hot and bitter, blurring her vision and making the world around her swim like a watercolor painting left out in the rain. She wiped at them angrily, knowing that crying was accomplishing nothing, that she needed to think, needed to find help, needed to get somewhere safe. But the street was emptying. The shops were closing, and Derek Vance was still there, still watching, still waiting with the patience of a hunter who knew his prey was running out of places to hide. She saw a mother with 2 young children walking toward a minivan, and she moved toward them, hope flickering weakly in her chest. But the mother took one look at Savannah's tear-streaked face and frantically moving hands pulled her children closer and hurried into her vehicle without a backward glance. A businessman talking on his cell phone brushed past her without even acknowledging her existence. 2 teenage girls looked up from their phones, giggled nervously at her gestures, and walked faster in the opposite direction. Savannah stood in the middle of the sidewalk, surrounded by people, and felt more alone than she had ever felt in her entire life. She thought about her grandmother, born deaf in 1942, who had fought her entire life against a world that told her she was less than that. Her silence meant she had nothing to say. Grandma Rose had always told her that being deaf was not a disability. It was just a different way of experiencing the world. But right now, in this moment with a predator closing in, and no one able to understand her cries for help, Savannah had never felt more disabled in her life. She looked back at Derek Vance, and something in her chest turned to ice. He was not pretending anymore. He was walking toward her now, not hiding, not lurking, just approaching with that slow, confident stride of a man who knew he had already won. That terrible smile was still fixed on his face, wider now, triumphant, and as the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the buildings and the streetlights flickered to life, Savannah saw something in his eyes that made her stomach drop. Hunger. He had been playing with her for 3 weeks, stalking her, terrorizing her, enjoying the way she jumped at shadows and checked over her shoulder every few seconds. But the game was ending now. She could see it in his eyes, in the way he moved, in the deliberate pace that said he was done waiting. Savannah ran. Her feet carried her toward the main street, where lights still glowed and people still moved, some primal instinct driving her toward life and warmth and the possibility of safety. Her heels were slowing her down, but she did not dare stop to take them off, did not dare lose even a single second while the monster was closing in behind her. Her blonde hair streamed behind her like a banner, her red dress a bright flash of color against the darkening street, and her heart pounded with such force that she could feel her entire body shaking with each beat. And then she saw it. Brennan's Corner Cafe sat on the intersection of Main and Oak like a beacon of hope, its large windows spilling warm golden light onto the darkening sidewalk. Through the glass, Savannah could see people inside, families sharing meals, couples leaning close over cups of coffee, individuals reading books or working on laptops, all of them safe and warm and completely unaware that a nightmare was unfolding just steps from their cozy haven. Savannah sprinted the last 20 feet and burst through the door with such force that the little bell above it jangled violently, and several heads turned to look at her with expressions of surprise and mild alarm. A waitress behind the counter, a young woman with a friendly face and a name tag that read Stephanie, called out something that Savannah could not hear, but she was already moving, scanning the room for someone, anyone who might understand her. The first table she reached was occupied by an elderly woman with silver hair and kind eyes. A cup of coffee and a magazine spread out before her. Savannah's hands flew through the air, forming desperate words as fast as she could manage while still being comprehensible. Please, I need help. A man is following me. I am deaf. Please help me. Please call the police. The elderly woman's eyes went wide, not with understanding, but with alarm. She held up her hands helplessly, clearly not comprehending a single gesture, and called out to someone across the room. Probably her husband, who came shuffling over with an equally confused and concerned expression. They exchanged worried looks, spoke to each other in words. Savannah could not read through her tears, and then turned back to her with apologetic helplessness written all over their faces. Savannah moved to the next table, where a group of college students sat with textbooks and laptops and half-empty cups of coffee. 4 young faces looked up at her with expressions that ranged from curious to uncomfortable. And as her hands began to move again, one of them pulled out his phone, perhaps trying to find a translation app or type, something for her to read. But his friends were already shifting in their seats, looking anywhere but at her, clearly not knowing how to respond to this panicked woman making gestures they could not comprehend. Please, Savannah signed, knowing they could not understand, but unable to stop herself. Please, someone help me, I am in danger. The student with the phone was still fumbling with some app, but his hands were shaking, and the screen kept glitching. And by the time he looked up again, with a sheepish expression, Savannah already knew it was too late. The cafe door opened behind her with a soft chime. She did not have to turn around to know who had just walked in. She could feel it, that cold presence that had been haunting her nightmares for 3 weeks, that prickling sensation on the back of her neck that said, danger was close, too close, closer than it had ever been before. The last safe space was no longer safe. The warm, golden sanctuary had been breached by the monster who had been hunting her through the autumn streets. Derek Vance was inside. Savannah's breath came in ragged gasps, and her vision blurred with fresh tears as the reality of her situation crashed over her like a wave of ice water. She was trapped, surrounded by people who could not understand her, stalked by a predator who knew exactly how helpless she was and completely cut off from any means of calling for help. The wall between her world and theirs had never felt so high, so impenetrable, so absolutely terrifyingly complete. Through the blur of panic and desperation, she scanned the room one final time, knowing that her options were running out, that any moment now, Derek would make his move, would find some way to get her alone, to finally finish what he had been planning for 3 weeks. And that is when she saw him. A man sitting by the window with a little girl, maybe 4 years old, sharing a plate of chicken nuggets arranged into a smiley face. Unlike everyone else in the cafe who had looked at her with confusion or pity or discomfort, this man was watching her with something entirely different in his eyes. He was not looking at her like she was crazy. He was not looking at her like she was a problem to be avoided. He was looking at her with concern, with focus, with something that looked remarkably like understanding. But more than that, more than his expression, or his posture, or the way he had half risen from his seat, one thing made Savannah's heart leap with desperate hope. He was watching her hands. Not her face, not her tear-streaked cheeks, not the red dress that had suddenly become a liability rather than an asset. He was watching her hands with the focused attention of someone who knew exactly what they were saying. Something about his gaze, something about the way he was leaning forward in his seat, made Savannah move toward him. Desperation. Instinct. The last flickering flame of hope that refused to die, even as the darkness closed in around her. She had no way of knowing that she was walking toward the answer to prayers she did not know how to speak. Savannah reached his table, her hands shaking so violently that she could barely form the signs, her vision swimming with tears, her breath coming in such ragged gasps that her chest ached with the effort of simply staying upright. Behind her, somewhere in the cafe, she could feel Derek Vance watching, waiting, probably wondering what she was doing and why she had stopped at this particular table with this particular man and his adorable little daughter. Her hands moved through the air, forming words that came from somewhere deeper than thought, from a place of pure, desperate need. Please help me. That man, he will not stop following me. He has been stalking me for weeks. I do not have my phone. I cannot call for help. Please. For a moment that stretched into eternity, nothing happened. The man simply looked at her, his brown eyes warm and kind, and completely focused on her trembling hands. Savannah felt her heart sink, felt the last thread of hope begin to fray, felt the darkness closing in from all sides. And then the man raised his hands. His movements were slow and deliberate, each gesture formed with careful precision so she would not miss a single word. His fingers shaped signs with the fluid naturalness of someone who had been speaking this language his entire life. And as the meaning of his words sank into Savannah's terrified mind, she felt something inside her crack open like a door that had been locked for far too long. I understand you. You are safe now. I am going to help you. What is your name? The relief that washed over Savannah was so profound, so overwhelming, that her entire body seemed to give out at once. Her knees buckled. Her grocery bag slipped from her fingers and spilled its contents across the floor. And she would have collapsed completely if the man had not risen quickly from his seat and caught her arm, steadying her with gentle but firm hands. For a moment, she could not sign at all. Her hands just hung in the air between them, trembling like leaves in a storm, suspended in a moment of pure, desperate gratitude that went beyond words in any language. Someone understood her. Someone saw her. After 3 weeks of terror and isolation, after tonight's nightmare of failed attempts and dismissive strangers, someone had finally heard her silent scream. She was not invisible anymore. Savannah. She finally managed to sign, tears spilling down her cheeks, in rivers that she made no effort to stop. "My name is Savannah. I am Garrett." The man signed back, his movements steady and calm, a counterpoint to her chaos. He guided her gently into the seat beside his daughter, positioning himself so that he was between Savannah and the rest of the cafe, between Savannah and the door, between Savannah and the monster who had followed her into what should have been safety. He turned to the little girl who was watching the exchange with wide eyes and a half-eaten chicken nugget clutched in her small hand. "Lily, honey, this nice lady is going to sit with us for a little while. Okay, she is having a very scary day, and we are going to help her." The little girl nodded solemnly, her curly brown hair bouncing with the movement. Her big blue eyes filled with that particular seriousness that children adopt when they sense something important is happening. "Is a bad guy being mean to her daddy, something like that, sweetheart? I need you to stay right here and be very brave. Can you do that for Daddy?" "I can be very brave," Lily announced, sitting up straighter in her seat. She reached out and patted Savannah's hand with her small, slightly sticky fingers. "Do not worry, pretty lady. My daddy is really good at helping people. He helped me when I was scared of the dark, and now I am not scared anymore." Despite everything, despite the terror still coursing through her veins, and the monster still somewhere in the cafe behind her, Savannah felt a tiny smile tug at the corner of her lips. This child, this earnest little girl, with her chicken nuggets and her unwavering faith in her father, was offering comfort to a complete stranger with the simple, uncomplicated kindness that only children seem to possess. Garrett stood, and Savannah watched as he transformed from a father having dinner with his daughter into something else entirely, something protective and determined and quietly formidable. He walked directly toward the counter where the waitress named Stephanie was watching the scene with confused concern, and although Savannah could not hear his words, she could read his lips well enough to understand the gist. "Call 911 right now. That man by the door has been stalking the woman at my table. She is deaf and does not have her phone. She has been trying to get help, but no one understood her. Do not let him leave." Stephanie's eyes went wide, and she immediately reached for the phone on the wall behind the counter. As she dialed, Garrett turned and walked toward Derek Vance, who was standing near the entrance with his hands in the pockets of his gray hoodie, trying to look casual and failing miserably. From her seat, Savannah watched the confrontation unfold. Garrett positioned himself directly in front of Derek, blocking any path to her table, his posture relaxed, but his presence unmistakably firm. Derek's confident smile flickered, faltered, and then died completely as he realized that his game had changed, that his carefully planned hunt had been interrupted by a variable he had not anticipated. Other patrons in the cafe were standing now, drawn by the tension forming a loose semicircle that blocked the door. The elderly woman and her husband, the college students with their textbooks. Even the barista had come out from behind the counter, crossing her arms over her chest and glaring at Derek with the righteous indignation of someone who had just learned they were in the presence of a predator. Savannah could see Derek's mouth moving, could see him gesturing at her, probably trying to spin some story about a misunderstanding about a jealous ex-girlfriend overreacting about anything that might let him walk out that door without consequences. But Garrett was not moving, was not backing down, was not giving an inch. And then, through the cafe's large windows, Savannah saw the most beautiful sight she had ever witnessed in her 26 years of life. Blue and red lights flashing against the night sky. The police had arrived. 2 officers entered the cafe, their presence commanding immediate attention, and Garrett stepped aside to speak with them gesturing toward Derek and then toward Savannah's table. One of the officers approached Derek, saying something that made his face go pale, and within minutes, he was being turned around, hands pulled behind his back, silver handcuffs clicking around his wrists. As the officers led him toward the door, Derek twisted to look at Savannah one final time. His mask had slipped completely, now revealing the truth beneath, and what she saw in his eyes made her blood run cold. Pure hatred. But then he was gone, pushed through the door and into the waiting patrol car, and Savannah was left sitting in the warm cafe with a kind little girl and the man who had saved her life simply by understanding the language of her hands. Garrett returned to the table and knelt beside her chair, his brown eyes filled with gentle concern. His hands moved through the air, shaping words that felt like a promise. "It is over. You are safe now. He cannot hurt you anymore." Savannah looked at this stranger, this unexpected hero who had seen her when everyone else had looked away, who had heard her when she had no voice, who had stepped between her and danger without hesitation or question. She looked at his kind eyes and his steady hands, and the little girl who was now offering her a chicken nugget with solemn generosity. "Do not cry." "Pretty lady," Lily said, holding out the nugget. "This one is shaped like a dinosaur. It is my favorite, but you can have it because you are sad. And dinosaur nuggets make everything better." Savannah laughed, a sound that bubbled up from somewhere deep inside her, a release of tension and terror and overwhelming gratitude. She accepted the nugget with trembling fingers and signed thank you to the little girl who beamed with pleasure, even though she probably did not understand the gesture. Garrett watched the exchange with a soft smile, and something passed between him and Savannah, something unspoken and profound, an understanding that went beyond the shared language of their hands. She did not know it, could not possibly know it, in this moment of chaos and relief and lingering fear. But her life had just changed forever. The man who had saved her was going to become so much more than a hero. He was going to become her home. The police station was a blur of fluorescent lights and institutional gray walls, and the particular kind of organized chaos that seemed to characterize every government building Savannah had ever visited. She sat in a small interview room, her red dress rumpled and stained from when she had dropped her grocery bag in the cafe, her carefully applied makeup long since ruined by tears, and the rough paper towels in the station's bathroom. But she was not alone. Through the glass window that separated the interview room from the main bullpen, she could see Garrett sitting in an uncomfortable plastic chair, his little daughter asleep in his arms, with her head resting against his shoulder. It was nearly midnight, and he had every reason to go home, every excuse to leave now that his part in the drama was over. The police had his statement. His daughter needed her bed. His role as hero was complete. But he stayed. Every time Savannah looked through that window, he was there, watching over her like a guardian angel who had traded his wings for a button-down shirt and kind brown eyes. She did not understand why he remained, did not know what obligation he felt toward a woman he had met only hours ago. But his presence through the glass was an anchor that kept her from drifting into the sea of panic that threatened to pull her under with every passing minute. The interview took 3 hours. An ASL interpreter had been called in, a middle-aged woman named Patricia, who translated Savannah's signed statements into spoken words for the detectives and spoke their questions in signs for Savannah to answer. The process was exhausting, going over every detail of the stalking, every encounter with Derek Vance, every failed attempt to get help before tonight. When Detective Morrison showed her Derek's file, Savannah felt her blood turn cold for an entirely different reason than fear. There were 2 other complaints from women in the past 5 years, both of whom had reported being followed, and watched, both of whom had eventually dropped their cases due to lack of evidence, or Savannah suspected, reading between the lines, lack of hope that anyone would believe them. She was not his first victim. She was just the most recent, and if Garrett had not been in that cafe tonight, if he had not understood her desperate signs, if he had not stood up and taken action when everyone else had looked away, she might have become another dropped case, another woman who could not prove her terror, another victim who learned too late that the justice system was never designed to protect people like her. When the interview finally ended, and Savannah emerged from the room on legs that trembled with exhaustion, Garrett was immediately on his feet. Lily stirred in his arms, mumbled something about dinosaurs, and then settled back into sleep, with the easy trust of a child who knew her father would keep her safe. Savannah realized with a small jolt of surprise that she had no way to get home. She had walked to the grocery store, which meant she was miles from her apartment, with no phone to call a cab and no energy to walk. The thought of asking the police for a ride made her stomach turn for reasons she could not quite articulate. Garrett seemed to understand, without her having to explain. He signed one-handed while supporting Lily with the other, his movements slightly awkward, but still comprehensible. "I can drive you home. It is late. You should not have to figure out transportation after everything you have been through." Savannah hesitated. Trust did not come easily to her, not anymore. Not after 3 weeks of being hunted by a man who had seemed perfectly normal and harmless until he was not. But something about Garrett, about his patient eyes and his sleeping daughter, and the way he had stepped into danger for a complete stranger, made her resistance crumble. She nodded, and together they walked out of the police station into the cold night air. The drive to her apartment was quiet, in the way that only a car containing a deaf person and someone who cannot sign while driving can be quiet. Lily slept in her car seat, occasionally making small sounds that Savannah could not hear, and Garrett focused on the road, while Savannah stared out the window at the passing streetlights, each one a small beacon of normalcy in a night that had been anything but normal. When they pulled up in front of her small apartment building, Savannah turned to look at Garrett, this stranger, who had become her savior in the space of a few terrible hours. She wanted to thank him, wanted to express the depth of her gratitude in a way that went beyond the simple signs she had been using all night, but words, even signed words, seemed inadequate for what he had done. Instead, she reached for the small pad of paper and pen she kept in her purse for communicating with hearing people who did not know sign language, and she wrote, "Why do you know sign language?" Garrett took the pad, read her question, and wrote his response. "My older brother. He has been deaf since birth." Their eyes met in the dim light of the car's interior, and something passed between them, an understanding that went beyond gratitude, beyond relief, beyond the circumstances that had brought them together. He was connected to her world in a way that most hearing people never were, and that connection, that bridge between their 2 ways of experiencing reality, felt like the beginning of something she could not quite name. She wrote one more thing before getting out of the car. "Thank you, Garrett. You saved my life." Then she was walking toward her building, and he was waiting, and she could feel his eyes on her back until she reached the door, unlocked it, and stepped inside. Only when the light in her window turned on did she hear through the vibration in the floor the sound of his car pulling away. Savannah locked every door, checked every window, retrieved her phone from her nightstand, and saw 47 notifications that suddenly seemed completely irrelevant. She sat on the edge of her bed in her ruined red dress, surrounded by the silence that had been her companion since birth, and finally allowed herself to cry. Not from fear this time. From relief. From exhaustion. From the overwhelming kindness of a stranger who had seen her when no one else could. Garrett could not sleep. He had put Lily to bed hours ago, had gone through their usual nighttime routine of teeth brushing and story reading, and the precise arrangement of stuffed animals that she insisted upon. And now he was sitting alone in his living room with a glass of water. He was not drinking, and a television playing a show he was not watching. His mind was elsewhere, back in that cafe watching a beautiful woman in a red dress move frantically from table to table, her hands shaping desperate words that no one around her could understand. He kept seeing the terror in her eyes, the way she had almost collapsed with relief, when he signed back, the tears streaming down her cheeks, as she realized, perhaps for the first time all night, that she was not alone. Savannah. Her name echoed in his mind like a song he could not forget. He did not know why her image was haunting him so persistently, did not understand why her eyes so full of fear and gratitude kept appearing every time he closed his own. But something about her, something about the way she had looked at him in that cafe, reminded him of something he had been trying to forget for 3 years. Garrett leaned back against the couch cushions and let the memories wash over him, the ones he usually kept locked away in the dark corners of his heart, where they could not hurt him every single day. Rachel, his wife, his love, the mother of his daughter, the woman he had failed to save. They had been happy, truly happy. The kind of happiness that people write songs about and build entire lives around. Rachel with her infectious laugh and her terrible cooking, and her absolute conviction that every problem could be solved with enough love and determination. They had met in college, married at 25, had Lily at 31, and Garrett had thought in that naive way that people think before tragedy teaches them better, that their happiness would last forever. He should have known that forever was a promise no one could keep. After Lily was born, Rachel had been tired. Everyone said it was normal, the exhaustion of new motherhood, the sleepless nights and endless feedings, and the complete reorganization of their lives around this tiny, demanding creature they had created. But Rachel's tiredness seemed different, somehow deeper and more profound, a weariness that sleep could not touch. Garrett should have noticed, should have insisted on more tests, should have pushed the doctors harder when they said everything was fine, and dismissed his concerns with that particular condescension that medical professionals sometimes reserve for worried husbands. But he was tired too, overwhelmed by the demands of a newborn, and a job, and a wife who seemed to be slipping away from him in increments so small he did not notice until it was far too late. The night it happened was unremarkable in every way, just another Tuesday in a series of Tuesdays that had blurred together since Lily's birth. They had gone to bed at 10 o'clock, Lily sleeping in her bassinet beside them, the house quiet and dark and peaceful. Garrett woke at 3 in the morning to the sound of something wrong. Rachel was seizing beside him, her body convulsing violently. Her eyes rolled back in her head, foam forming at the corners of her mouth. He called 911, with hands that shook so badly he could barely press the buttons. Held her through the convulsions. Screamed her name as if he could call her back from wherever she was going. The ambulance arrived in 7 minutes, but by then it was already over. Postpartum complications, the doctors said, later their faces carefully neutral. In that way, medical professionals learn to be when delivering devastating news. A rare but documented phenomenon. Something that had been building in her body for weeks, invisible and deadly, a bomb waiting to explode. There was nothing you could have done, they told him. These things sometimes happen. No one is to blame. But Garrett knew better. He should have noticed the warning signs, should have demanded more tests, should have been more attentive, more present, more aware of the woman he loved. Instead, he had been caught up in the exhaustion of new parenthood, in the demands of his job, in the million small distractions that had pulled his attention away from the only thing that really mattered. Rachel died at 33 years old, and Garrett buried her on a gray November morning, while their 18-month-old daughter sat in his mother's arms, too young to understand why Daddy kept crying. The first year after Rachel's death was a blur of grief so profound, it felt like drowning. Garrett went through the motions of being a father, of working his job, of existing in a world that suddenly seemed colorless and cold, but he was not really there. He was a ghost, haunting his own life, going through motions that meant nothing, speaking words that tasted like ash. His mother had moved in for 6 months to care for Lily because Garrett could barely care for himself. He forgot to eat, could not sleep, spent hours staring at Rachel's photograph, having conversations with a woman who would never answer. The guilt was a constant companion whispering in his ear every night that he should have noticed, should have saved her, should have been enough. What pulled him back was his brother. Connor flew in from Washington, D.C. the week after the funeral and stayed for a month sleeping on Garrett's couch, forcing him to eat and shower and occasionally leave the house. Connor, who had been deaf since birth, who had spent his entire life learning to navigate a world that was not designed for him, who understood loss and isolation and the particular loneliness of being different in ways that most people could not comprehend. They sat together for hours, not signing, just being present. And finally, when Garrett was ready to listen, Connor signed the words that would begin his slow journey back to life. Grief does not have a timeline, but Lily needs her father. Rachel would want you to fight. Connor became Garrett's lifeline in the months that followed, calling every week, visiting every month, reminding him that he knew how to love someone in a silent world, that he had been practicing that skill his entire life, that the language of hands and eyes and presence was just as powerful as any spoken word. Slowly, painfully, Garrett began to heal, but the guilt never fully went away. And tonight, watching Savannah struggle and fail to communicate her terror, watching her move from table to table with desperate hope that kept dying in strangers' eyes, Garrett had felt something stir in his chest that he had not felt in 3 years. Purpose. He could not save Rachel. That wound would never fully heal, and perhaps it was not meant to. But tonight in that cafe, he had saved someone. He had understood when no one else could. He had stepped between a woman and the monster hunting her. And for the first time since that terrible November morning, he felt like something more than a ghost, going through the motions of being alive. Garrett pulled his phone from his pocket and looked at the napkin where Savannah had written her contact information for the police report. He had copied her number into his phone hours ago without really knowing why, just feeling like he needed to have. It needed to have some connection to this woman who had appeared in his life like a hurricane and left him feeling strangely, impossibly alive. He did not know what he would say to her, did not know if she would even want to hear from him after tonight. But something told him with a certainty that surprised him that their story was not over. It was just beginning. Morning light filtered through Savannah's curtains with a gentleness that felt almost cruel, as if the sun did not know that the world had tilted on its axis overnight, and nothing would ever be quite the same again. She woke slowly, disoriented, still wearing the red dress that had become a symbol of the worst and best night of her life. For a long moment, she just lay there, staring at the ceiling, trying to reconcile the terror of the previous evening with the peaceful ordinarinesses of her bedroom. Her mascara had left dark stains on her pillow. Her hair was a tangled mess. Her entire body ached with the tension of prolonged fear finally releasing its grip. But she was alive, and somewhere in the Ashford County Jail, Derek Vance was not. Savannah reached for her phone and saw, amid the barrage of notifications she had ignored last night, a single text from an unknown number that made her heart skip in a way that had nothing to do with fear. "This is Garrett from last night. I wanted to make sure you were okay. No pressure to respond." She stared at the message for a long time, reading it over and over, as if the words might change or disappear. He had reached out. He had thought about her. This stranger who had stepped into her nightmare and pulled her out, who had understood her language when the rest of the world had just seen a crazy woman waving her hands in the air, who had looked at her with kindness instead of pity. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, unsure how to respond, unsure what she could possibly say that would convey the depth of her gratitude without sounding desperate or strange or too much. She thought about her grandmother, about the stories she had told, of a world that did not understand deaf people, that tried to silence them and hide them and pretend they did not exist. Grandma Rose had fought against that world. Her entire life had demanded to be seen and heard and valued, had refused to accept the limitations that others tried to place on her. Savannah came from a long line of fighters. Her parents had discovered her deafness when she was 11 months old during a routine hearing test that revealed what they had somehow failed to notice, that their beautiful baby girl could not hear a single sound. Her mother had cried for a week, convinced that Savannah's life was over before it had really begun, that she would never be able to speak or learn or have friends or fall in love or do any of the 1,000 things that hearing people took for granted. It was Grandma Rose who had changed everything. Born in 1942 in an era when deaf children were routinely institutionalized or hidden away like shameful secrets, Rose had fought for her education, her independence, her right to live a full and complete life. She had married a hearing man who learned to sign because he loved her, had raised 3 children who were bilingual in English, and ASL had become an advocate for deaf rights long before it was fashionable or comfortable or even legally protected. When Rose learned that her granddaughter was deaf, she had sat down with Savannah's terrified mother and signed the words that would become the foundation of Savannah's entire life. "That baby is going to do everything any hearing child can do. She is just going to do it differently. And different is not less. Different is just different." Savannah had grown up believing those words had internalized them so deeply that they felt like part of her DNA. She attended the Tennessee School for the Deaf from age 5. Flourishing in an environment where everyone spoke her language, where she was never the odd one out, where her deafness was just one characteristic among many rather than the defining feature of her existence. She graduated top of her class, earned a scholarship to Gallaudet University in Washington, D.C., built a successful freelance graphic design business from the ground up. She had friends who were deaf and friends who were hearing clients who valued her work without pitying her limitations, a life that was full and rich and meaningful. But she was also profoundly, achingly lonely in ways that she rarely admitted even to herself. Dating in the hearing world was a minefield that she had learned to navigate but never quite mastered. Men were fascinated by her, at first intrigued by the novelty of a woman who communicated with her hands, who existed in a world of silence that they could only imagine. But the fascination always faded, replaced by frustration, when conversations took too long, when restaurants had to be chosen for their lighting rather than their ambiance, when phone calls were impossible and video chats required a specific kind of attention that many people were not willing to give. One boyfriend had broken up with her after 6 months with a text message that still stung. When she thought about it, I just cannot do this forever. The communication thing is too hard. Another had introduced her to his parents as my deaf girlfriend, putting her disability before her name, before her personality, before everything else that made her who she was. Eventually, Savannah had stopped trying. She convinced herself that independence was enough, that she did not need a partner to be complete, that Grandma Rose had been right all along about doing everything differently, and that different included being alone. She had her work, her apartment, her carefully constructed life of comfortable solitude. And then, Derek Vance had appeared. He had first noticed her at a coffee shop 3 weeks ago when she was laughing with a deaf friend, their hands moving animatedly through a conversation about nothing important. She had not noticed him at all, had not seen the way he watched her from across the room with an intensity that should have been a warning sign. He had followed her home that day, and every day, since learning her schedule, her routes, her habits, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The perfect moment had almost been last night. Savannah shuddered, pulling the covers tighter around herself, and forced her mind away from what could have happened and back to what had actually happened instead. She looked at Garrett's text again, at those simple words that contained so much kindness, and finally typed her response. "I'm okay, thank you again. I do not know what would have happened if you were not there." His reply came within minutes, and despite everything, despite the trauma and the exhaustion and the lingering fear that Derek Vance's face still inspired, Savannah found herself smiling. "I am glad I could help. If you ever need anything, even just someone to talk to who understands ASL, I am here. Someone to talk to who understands ASL." It was such a simple offer, and yet it meant more than Garrett could possibly know. Because in Savannah's world, where communication was a constant battle against barriers visible and invisible, having someone who spoke her language was more valuable than gold. She saved his number in her contacts, and something that felt suspiciously like hope began to bloom in her chest. The texting started slowly, tentatively, like two people learning the steps of a dance neither had practiced before. Garrett would send her photos of Lily's crayon drawings, and Savannah would respond with pictures of her latest design projects. They talked about nothing important and everything that mattered, building a bridge between their two worlds, one message at a time. A week passed, then 2. The texts became longer, more personal, more essential to both their daily routines. Garrett found himself checking his phone constantly, waiting for the little notification that meant Savannah had responded. Savannah found herself smiling at her screen more often than she had smiled in months, maybe years. But texting was not enough. "Would you want to video chat sometime?" Garrett wrote one evening after a particularly long exchange about their favorite books. "I feel like I am losing my ASL skills typing everything out. My hands miss the conversation." Savannah stared at the message, her heart doing something complicated in her chest. A video call meant seeing him again. Really seeing him. Not just words on a screen, but hands moving through the air, and eyes meeting across the digital divide. It meant vulnerability in a way that texting did not require. It meant opening a door that she was not sure she was ready to walk through. But she found herself typing yes anyway. Their first video call lasted 3 hours. Garrett appeared on her screen, looking slightly nervous. His brown hair a little disheveled. His background clearly a lived-in living room, with toys scattered across the floor and a child's drawing taped to the wall behind him. His hands moved naturally as he signed fluid, and confident, clearly having had years of practice. "Is this better?" he asked, and the sight of those words formed by real hands instead of typed characters made something warm spread through Savannah's chest. "Much better." She signed back. I was getting tired of autocorrect changing deaf to dead. Garrett laughed, and even through the screen. Even without being able to hear the sound, Savannah could see the genuine joy in his expression. It transformed his entire face, erasing the subtle lines of worry that she had noticed at the cafe, and making him look younger, lighter, more at peace. They talked about everything that night. About his brother Connor, who had taught him to sign before he could properly speak, who had shown him that the deaf world was not a tragedy, but simply a different way of being human. About her grandmother Rose, who had fought for her right to exist in a world that tried to render her invisible. About growing up different, about the isolation that came with being caught between two worlds, about the particular loneliness of being understood by so few. My mother was terrified when she found out I was deaf. Savannah signed her movements carrying the weight of long-held memories. She thought my life was over, that I would never speak or learn, or have friends, or fall in love. "What changed her mind?" Garrett asked. "My grandmother. She was deaf too, born in a time when people like us were hidden away or institutionalized. She told my mother that I would do everything hearing children could do. I would just do it differently." Savannah paused. She was right. About most things. Most things, Savannah hesitated, then decided to be honest. This man had saved her life. He deserved her truth. The love part has been harder than she promised, she admitted. Hearing men always make me feel like a project, something to fix or manage or overcome. They are fascinated at first, but the fascination fades. And then I am just the deaf girl who is too much work. Garrett's expression shifted, something like pain crossing his features. That is their loss. Their complete and total loss. "What about you?" Savannah asked, eager to change the subject. Lily's mother. The pause before Garrett responded told her everything she needed to know about the weight of this question. His hands moved slowly when he finally began to sign each gesture, heavy with grief that time had softened, but not erased. Rachel died 3 years ago. Postpartum complications that the doctors missed. She had a seizure in the middle of the night, and by the time the ambulance arrived, he could not finish. "I'm so sorry," Savannah signed, and she meant it with every fiber of her being. "I cannot imagine losing someone like that, the person you chose to build a life with." I should have noticed the warning signs, Garrett continued, and Savannah recognized the particular quality of guilt in his expression, the kind that came from replaying every moment and wondering what you could have done differently. She was tired, so tired, and I just kept telling myself it was normal. New mother exhaustion. It would pass, but it never passed, and I never pushed hard enough for answers. And then, "You could not have known," Savannah interrupted, her hands moving with gentle firmness. "An invisible illness is not your failure. You loved her. You were present. You were doing your best. That has to be enough, because it is all any of us can do." Garrett stared at her through the screen, and for a long moment, neither of them signed anything. But the silence was not awkward. It was full, complete, a communication that went beyond words in any language. "Daddy," a small voice off camera made Garrett turn. "Daddy, who is the pretty lady?" Lily appeared on the screen, her curly brown hair, sleep-mussed, her dinosaur pajamas, slightly too big for her small frame. She peered at Savannah through the camera with the unabashed curiosity of childhood. "This is Savannah," Garrett signed, and spoke simultaneously. "Remember I told you about her? She is the lady from the cafe." Lily's eyes went wide with recognition. The pretty lady who was scared. "Hi, pretty lady. I like your yellow hair." Savannah laughed that silent laugh that Garrett was beginning to love, her whole face lighting up with genuine joy. She waved at the little girl and signed "thank you" slowly, in case Lily might understand. "What is she doing with her hands?" Lily asked her father. "She is talking, sweetheart. She cannot hear like you and me, so she uses her hands to have conversations." Lily's brow furrowed with intense concentration. "Like when we play charades." "Sort of. But it is a real language with words and sentences and everything. Uncle Connor talks that way, remember?" "Oh yeah," Lily bounced excitedly. "Can I learn to talk with my hands too?" "Maybe someday, sweetheart. But right now, it is past your bedtime." Lily pouted, but allowed herself to be herded away from the camera, pausing only to wave enthusiastically at Savannah and call out, "Bye, pretty lady. Can she come to our house? I want to show her my dinosaurs." When Garrett returned to the screen, slightly flustered and adorably apologetic, Savannah was still smiling. "I am sorry about that. She is not great with boundaries yet." "Do not apologize." Savannah signed. "She is wonderful, completely wonderful." They talked for another hour after that, until Garrett had to go deal with some bedtime negotiation that apparently involved the precise angle at which Lily's nightlight needed to face. But before they ended the call, he asked her something that made her heart skip. "Would you want to have dinner with us? Just dinner. It's friends. Lily makes a mean... well, she helps me make a mean macaroni and cheese." Savannah hesitated. Trust did not come easily after everything she had been through, after years of disappointment and 3 weeks of terror and a lifetime of being let down by people who promised to understand, but never really did. But something about Garrett's patient eyes, about Lily's eager wave, about the warmth that had been building in her chest throughout this conversation made her resistance crumble. "Okay," she signed. "I would like that." The dinner at Garrett's house was everything Savannah had not known she needed. His modest home was warm and lived in, with toys scattered across the floor and children's artwork covering the refrigerator, and the particular comfortable chaos that comes with raising a small child alone. Lily had greeted her at the door with the enthusiasm of a puppy, immediately grabbing her hand and insisting on a full house tour that included every stuffed animal, every crayon drawing, and every hiding spot she had discovered in her 4 years of life. Savannah noticed Rachel everywhere, in the photographs that lined the hallway, showing a beautiful woman with dark hair and a warm smile, holding a newborn Lily, dancing with Garrett at what looked like their wedding, laughing at something off camera. In the small touches around the house, an embroidered pillow on the couch, a set of cookbooks on the kitchen shelf, a delicate necklace in a shadow box on the wall. Rachel's presence was woven into the fabric of this home, a ghost who haunted not with malice, but with love. Dinner was chaotic in the best possible way. Lily chattered constantly, her small voice filling the air with observations about her day. Questions about Savannah's yellow hair, theories about whether dinosaurs had favorite colors. Garrett signed across the table while simultaneously managing his daughter's eating habits, their hands creating a secondary conversation that ran alongside Lily's endless monologue. But throughout the evening, Savannah noticed something that made a knot form in her stomach. Lily kept asking what and huh with increasing frequency. She turned her head to favor her right ear when Garrett spoke. She did not respond when he called her name from another room. After Lily had been put to bed, after the dishes were done, and the toys were picked up, and the house had settled into quiet Savannah, found herself sitting on the couch with Garrett, trying to figure out how to say something that she desperately hoped she was wrong about. Garrett, she finally signed her movements careful and slow. I do not want to overstep. You barely know me, and this is not my place. But I need to ask something. His expression shifted to concern. What is it? Has Lily's hearing been tested recently? The color drained from Garrett's face so quickly that Savannah feared he might actually faint. His hands trembled as he tried to respond, forming signs that did not quite complete themselves before breaking apart. I have noticed it too. He finally managed. The last few months, she does not hear me when I call from another room. She turns the television volume higher than she used to. She asks people to repeat themselves more often. His jaw tightened with the effort of admitting something he had been desperately trying to deny. I have been telling myself it is nothing. Ear infections, maybe. Selective hearing like all kids do. I have been avoiding finding out for sure, Savannah completed for him. Yes, the word was barely a whisper, more movement of lips than actual sign. If I do not know if there is no diagnosis, then maybe it is not real. Maybe I'm just being paranoid. Savannah reached out and took his hand, stilling their anxious movement. She waited until he looked at her, really looked at her, before she spoke. I understand why you are afraid, more than you know. But Lily deserves to have answers, whatever they are. And if something is happening with her hearing, the earlier you know, the better. You can prepare her for what is coming. What if? Garrett's hands freed themselves from hers to continue signing, but the words came hard. What if she ends up like Connor? What if she goes completely deaf? Then she will learn to live in a silent world. Savannah signed gently. The way I do, the way your brother does. And she will be okay, because she has a father who already knows how to communicate with her. Garrett stared at her for a long moment, and then he pulled out his phone and began searching for audiologists in the area. His hands were still shaking, but he was moving forward, facing the fear instead of hiding from it. Savannah watched him, and something shifted in her heart. This man who had saved her life without hesitation was now letting her into his most vulnerable space, sharing his deepest fear, accepting her help with a trust that she had not earned, but desperately wanted to deserve. I will come with you, she offered, to the appointment. If you want, you should not have to do this alone. Garrett looked up from his phone, his eyes glistening with tears he was fighting not to shed. I would like that. I would really like that. The audiologist's office was exactly what Savannah had expected, a cheerful waiting room designed to put children at ease with bright colors and children's magazines and a small play area in the corner. Lily thought it was all a great adventure, excitedly examining the toys and chattering about how she was going to pass all the tests and win all the games. Garrett sat rigid in the plastic chair, his hands gripping the armrests so tightly that his knuckles had gone white. Savannah sat beside him close enough that their shoulders touched, offering what comfort she could through proximity alone. When the technician called Lily's name, the little girl bounced up with enthusiasm. Watch me, Daddy, I am going to be really good. The testing room was visible through a large window, and Garrett pressed himself against the glass, like a man watching his own execution. Lily sat in a small chair, wearing oversized headphones that made her look impossibly tiny, turning her head toward sounds that Savannah could not hear, pressing buttons when she detected tones completely unaware of the weight of what was happening. She missed several sounds. Savannah could tell from the technician's expression from the way she adjusted frequencies, and tried again from the subtle furrow in her brow that deepened with each failed response. Lily turned to look at sounds on her right side, but her left ear seemed to miss them entirely. She pressed the button enthusiastically for low tones, but did not react at all to some of the higher frequencies. Beside her, Garrett made a sound that Savannah felt through the vibration in her own chest, a broken exhalation that was half sob, half prayer. Dr. R. Mitchell, a kind woman in her 50s, with silver-streaked hair and gentle eyes, delivered the results in her office, with Lily playing in the waiting room under a receptionist's watchful eye. Her words were calm and measured, designed to soften a blow that could not really be softened. Progressive sensorineural hearing loss, genetic in origin. Lily's hearing would continue to deteriorate over the next 2 to 3 years. There was no cure, only management hearing aids for now sign language eventually. By the time she was 7 or 8, she would likely be profoundly deaf. Garrett's world narrowed to a single point of pain. He heard the words, but could not process them, could not make them fit into any reality he was willing to accept. This was his daughter they were talking about, his little girl, who loved dinosaurs and chicken nuggets and singing along to Disney movies. They were telling him that she would never hear music again, never hear his voice, never hear the world that had surrounded her every moment of her 4 years of life. Daddy Lily's voice came from the doorway, where she had escaped from the receptionist and come looking for her father. "Daddy, why are you crying?" "I passed the game, right?" I was really good. Garrett could not speak, could not move, could not do anything but stare at his daughter with tears streaming down his face and his heart shattering into pieces too small to ever reassemble. Savannah stepped forward, kneeling beside Lily and signing slowly, simply, the way she would to any hearing child who did not yet know her language. "You did great, sweetie. Your daddy is just very proud of you." Lily beamed, accepting this explanation with the easy trust of childhood. "I knew I would be good." "Can we get ice cream now? You promised, Daddy." Garrett tried to respond, tried to form words around the grief choking him, but nothing came out. Savannah looked at Dr. Mitchell, who nodded her understanding, and then she took Lily's hand and led her back to the waiting room with promises of ice cream and more games and all the distractions a 4-year-old heart could desire. Behind her, she could hear Garrett finally break down completely, his sobs echoing through the small office as the reality of his daughter's future crashed over him like a wave he could not outrun. The drive home was silent in a way that had nothing to do with Savannah's deafness. Garrett sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window at nothing, his face still wet with tears he had stopped trying to hide. Lily had fallen asleep in her car seat, exhausted from the adventure of the appointment and the ice cream stop that followed, completely unaware of the storm that had just devastated her father's world. At the house, Savannah carried Lily to her bed, tucking her in with practiced gentleness, smoothing the curly hair from her forehead and pressing a soft kiss to her temple. The little girl stirred, but did not wake, and Savannah stood watching her for a moment. This child, who did not know that the world was going silent around her, who was still laughing and playing and living as if nothing had changed. When she returned to the living room, Garrett was exactly where she had left him, sitting on the couch staring at nothing, his entire body radiating a grief so profound it seemed to have its own gravity. Savannah sat beside him, not touching, just present. She had learned long ago that sometimes the most important thing you could do for someone in pain was simply be there to witness their suffering without trying to fix it or minimize it or rush them past it. Finally, after what felt like hours, Garrett's hands began to move. "I cannot do this." The signs were shaky, barely formed, but Savannah understood. "I cannot watch my daughter lose her hearing. I cannot explain to her why the world is going silent. I cannot. His hands dropped into his lap, defeated. I already lost Rachel. I cannot lose Lily too. You are not losing her. Savannah signed back gently. She is still going to be Lily. Still going to love dinosaurs and chicken nuggets and her daddy. She is just going to experience the world differently. You do not understand. Garrett's movements became more agitated, more desperate. My brother Connor, he struggled so much growing up. The bullying, the isolation. Kids who called him stupid because he could not hear them. Teachers who did not know how to accommodate him. He spent years feeling like an outsider in his own world. I watched him cry himself to sleep so many nights, and I could not do anything. I could not fix it. He looked at her with eyes that held depths of pain she was only beginning to understand. I cannot watch Lily go through that. I cannot watch my daughter feel like she does not belong in her own life. Savannah let him pour it out, all the fear and grief and guilt that had been building since the first time he noticed Lily asking what too many times. She let him talk about the nights he had lain awake wondering if he was imagining things, hoping he was just a paranoid parent seeing problems where none existed. She let him confess to the desperate bargaining he had done with a universe that never answered, promising to be a better father, a better person, anything. If only his daughter could be spared. When he was finally empty, when the words stopped coming and his hands fell still. Savannah reached out and took those hands in her own. She waited until his eyes met hers. I need to tell you something, she signed, and I need you to really hear it. Savannah's hands moved through the air with a passion and certainty that commanded attention. She had spent 26 years being deaf. 26 years learning what that meant and what it did not mean. And now she was going to share that knowledge with this broken man who needed it more than he needed air. I was born into silence. I have never heard my mother's voice. I have never heard music the way you hear it, or thunder, or birds singing in the morning. The world you live in, the world of sound and speech and casual conversation, is as foreign to me as another planet. Garrett watched her, his tear-streaked face completely focused on her movements. And you know what? My life is beautiful. She paused, letting that sink in. I graduated top of my class at the Tennessee School for the Deaf. I earned a degree in graphic design from one of the best universities in the country. I built my own business from nothing but talent and determination. I have friends who love me, clients who value my work, a life that is full and rich and meaningful. Her hands moved faster now, more emphatic. Yes, there are challenges. There are people who underestimate me, who pity me, who treat me like something broken that needs to be fixed. There are restaurants I cannot enjoy because the lighting is wrong for signing. There are relationships that have failed because hearing men could not handle the communication differences. There are moments more than I like to admit when I feel lonely and misunderstood. She leaned closer to Garrett, making sure he saw every sign clearly. But those challenges do not define my life. They are just part of it. The same way your grief over Rachel is part of your life, but not all of it. The same way Lily's deafness will be part of her life, but not all of it. Garrett's hands finally moved shaky, but determined. What if I'm not enough? What if I can, not give her what she needs? You already speak her future language, Savannah reminded him. Do you know how rare that is? Most parents of deaf children have to start from scratch, learning signs, while their child is learning them too, always playing catch-up. But you already know ASL. You already know how to communicate in a silent world. That is a gift, Garrett. It is a gift you can give her every single day. She squeezed his hands, feeling the tremor in his fingers beginning to still. Lily has something else that I did not have at her age. She has you, a father, who has loved a deaf person his entire life, who understands the deaf world from the inside, who can guide her through this transition with knowledge and patience and acceptance. And she has me," Savannah added quietly. "If you want, I will teach her everything I know. I will show her that deaf is not broken, not less, not a tragedy. I will introduce her to my community, to deaf children and adults who can show her what her future looks like, to people who will never make her feel like an outsider because they understand exactly what she is going through." Garrett stared at her with eyes that held something new, not just grief, but wonder. "Why? Why would you do this for us? You barely know us. You have your own life, your own problems. Why would you take on ours?" Savannah thought about the cafe, about the terror and the helplessness and the overwhelming relief when she found someone who understood. She thought about her grandmother, who had spent her entire life fighting for deaf people to be seen and valued. She thought about the loneliness that had been her constant companion, and how much less alone she had felt in the weeks since Garrett had stepped into her life. "Because someone helped me when I was terrified and alone," she finally signed. "Now it is my turn, and because—" She hesitated, then decided to be brave. "Because you and Lily make me feel like I belong somewhere. For the first time in a very long time, I do not feel invisible when I am with you." Garrett pulled her into his arms so suddenly that she had no time to react. He held her against his chest, his body shaking with sobs that might have been grief or relief or some complicated mixture of both. Savannah wrapped her arms around him and held on, feeling his heartbeat against her cheek, feeling for the first time in years like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. When they finally pulled apart, something had shifted between them. This was no longer just friendship, no longer just gratitude, no longer just two wounded people offering each other comfort. This was the beginning of something deeper, something neither of them had expected, something that felt like hope. The weeks that followed became a whirlwind of change and growth and unexpected joy. Savannah started coming to Garrett's house several times a week, ostensibly to help Lily prepare for her hearing loss, but really because the three of them had become inseparable in a way that none of them wanted to examine too closely. She made learning sign language feel like discovering a superpower. Games where Lily had to sign the names of her stuffed animals to get them back. Songs translated into movement. The rhythm felt through vibrations rather than heard through ears. Storytelling sessions, where Savannah's entire body became a canvas for narrative, her expressions as eloquent as any spoken word. Lily picked it up with the natural ease of childhood. Within a month, she could sign basic conversations. Within 2 months, she was teaching her father new vocabulary that she had learned from Miss Savannah. Within 3 months, she was signing in her sleep, her small hands moving through dreams that Savannah could only imagine. But it was not just language lessons. Savannah took Lily and Garrett to deaf community events, to picnics in the park, where children and adults signed and laughed and played together, where no one felt different because everyone was the same. Lily made her first deaf friend, a boy named Oliver, who taught her the signs for butterfly and rainbow and best friends forever. "Daddy, look," she would squeal after every event, her hands moving with increasing confidence. "Oliver taught me how to say so many new things. Watch, watch. This is how you sign rainbow." And Garrett would watch his daughter, so full of joy and curiosity and complete absence of fear about her future, and he would feel something loosen in his chest. The terror was still there, hovering at the edges of his thoughts. But it was no longer suffocating him. It was no longer the only thing he could see when he looked at his daughter's future. Because Lily was not just learning to be deaf. She was learning to be part of a community. She was learning that different did not mean less. She was learning that she would never be alone. One evening, Savannah brought over a keyboard and showed Lily how to feel the vibrations of different notes through the wood. "Put your hand here," she signed, pressing Lily's small palm against the smooth surface. "Can you feel this one?" She played a deep bass note, and Lily's eyes went wide with wonder. "It tickles, do another one." They spent an hour playing with sound as vibration with music, as something you could feel in your bones, rather than just hear with your ears. Garrett watched from the doorway, this woman who had crashed into his life as a terrified stranger, and had somehow become essential to his family's happiness. Later that night, when he tucked Lily into bed, she signed sleepily with hands that were growing more confident every day. "Miss Savannah says music lives in your heart, not your ears." "I like that, Daddy. Is it true I think it is?" Sweetheart Garrett signed back, his heart so full it ached. "I think Miss Savannah is very wise about a lot of things. I love her." Lily announced matter-of-factly, as only a child could announce something so enormous. "Can she be here forever?" Garrett kissed his daughter's forehead and did not answer, because the answer that lived in his heart was too big, too complicated, too terrifying to put into words. But when he went back downstairs and saw Savannah sitting on his couch, flipping through the book of Lily's artwork, with a soft smile on her face, he thought that forever did not sound so scary after all. 3 months after the diagnosis with Lily's hearing, continuing its gradual decline, but her spirit remaining unbroken, Garrett finally worked up the courage to ask Savannah on a real date. Just the two of them. No daughter, no lessons, no pretense of friendship, when what he was feeling was so obviously more. "Would you have dinner with me?" he asked one evening after Lily was in bed. "A real dinner. At a restaurant. Like adults do when they—" He stumbled, his hands faltering. "When they want to be more than friends." Savannah felt her heart skip in a way that she had almost forgotten hearts could skip. She had been waiting for this, hoping for this, terrified of this. Because wanting something this much meant it could hurt when it inevitably disappeared. But Garrett was not going to disappear. She had seen him at his lowest, had watched him break down and rebuild himself, had witnessed his love for his daughter and his kindness toward strangers. This was not a man who walked away when things got hard. Yes, she signed, feeling the smile spread across her face. "I would like that very much." The restaurant she chose was a small Italian place with good lighting essential for signing, and a quiet atmosphere that allowed for intimate conversation. She wore a deep blue dress that brought out her eyes, and when Garrett saw her waiting at the table, he actually stumbled over his own feet. "You are beautiful," he signed. When he finally sat down, his movements slightly clumsy with nerves. "I mean, you are always beautiful, but tonight you are especially—" "I am going to stop talking now." Savannah laughed that silent laugh he had come to love, her whole face lighting up with genuine joy. Without Lily as their buffer, the conversation went deeper than it ever had before. Savannah talked about her failed relationships, about the hearing men who had made her feel like a project to be managed rather than a person to be loved. She talked about the loneliness that had become her constant companion, about convincing herself that independence was enough, when really it was just all she thought she could have. Garrett talked about dating after Rachel, about the 2 awkward attempts he had made that ended with him feeling like he was betraying her memory. He talked about how he had shut himself off from the possibility of love, convinced that he had already used up his share of happiness, and asking for more would be greedy. "What is different now?" Savannah asked, her hands moving with the hesitation of someone asking a question they were not sure they wanted answered. Garrett looked at her across the candlelit table, at this woman who had stumbled into his life as a terrified stranger and had somehow become the center of his world. "You," he signed simply. "Everything about you is different." They walked home through the autumn night, their hands moving through conversations that felt lighter, more hopeful, more full of possibility than anything Savannah had experienced in years. When they reached her apartment, Garrett hesitated on the doorstep, clearly working up the courage for something. "I had a wonderful time," Savannah signed. "Me too." Garrett's hands were trembling again, but not from cold. "Savannah, I need to tell you something. I have been trying to find the right moment, and I do not know if this is it. But I do not want to wait anymore." She watched him, her heart pounding. He stopped, started again. "I think I'm falling in love with you." The words hung in the air between them, visible in his hands, unmistakable in their meaning. Savannah felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. Not tears of sadness, but of something she had almost forgotten how to feel. Joy. Pure, uncomplicated joy. She reached up and took his face in her hands, pulling him down to her level, and kissed him with everything she had been afraid to feel for so long. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Savannah signed against his chest where he could feel the movement even in the dark. "I think I am falling in love with you too." A month after that first kiss, after weeks of stolen moments and growing intimacy, and the particular joy of building something new from two broken pieces, the tension that had been building beneath the surface finally erupted. It had been a hard day. Lily had come home from preschool crying because a classmate had called her weird for wearing her hearing aids. Savannah had spent 3 hours trying to cheer her up, teaching her new signs and playing games, and doing everything she could to remind this precious child that she was perfect exactly as she was. By the time Lily was finally asleep, Savannah was exhausted in a way that went beyond physical tiredness. She had given everything she had, and she felt empty. Scraped raw, desperate for someone to see her as something more than a resource. Garrett found her in the kitchen staring at nothing, and immediately started talking about Lily's hearing appointment next week, and the new classroom accommodations they needed to request, and the sign language tutor they should probably hire to supplement what Savannah was teaching her. Something inside Savannah snapped. "Am I your girlfriend or Lily's ASL tutor?" She signed, her movements sharp with hurt she had been suppressing for weeks. "Because sometimes I cannot tell the difference." Garrett looked stunned. "What are you talking about?" "Every conversation we have is about Lily's hearing. Every date includes her. Every plan we make centers on her needs." Savannah's hands faltered, and she had to take a breath before continuing. "I love Lily. You know I do. But sometimes I need to know that you want me, not just because I am useful." The silence that followed was deafening in its own way. "I have spent my whole life being useful." Savannah continued, the words pouring out now that she had started. "The deaf friend who can teach your kid, the diversity hire for the company photo, the inspiration story people share on social media. Just once I want someone to want me, just me. Not my usefulness, not my deafness, just Savannah." Tears were streaming down her face, and she hated herself for crying, hated showing this weakness, hated needing something so desperately from someone who might not be able to give it. "I'm sorry." Garrett's hands moved slowly, deliberately, making sure she saw every word. "You are right. I have been so focused on Lily's diagnosis that I forgot to just be with you. I have been treating you like a solution to a problem instead of the woman I love." He moved closer, taking her hands in his and stilling their anxious movement. "You are not a resource to me, Savannah. You are not useful. You are." He struggled for words, for signs that could carry the weight of what he was trying to say. You are the reason I wake up looking forward to something again. You are the reason my daughter is facing her future without fear. You are the reason I finally feel like I am living instead of just surviving." She stared at him through her tears, wanting to believe him, afraid to believe him. "I love you," Garrett signed, and the simplicity of it. The certainty broke through the last of her defenses. Not because you are useful, not because you are Lily's teacher. "I love you, Savannah Blake. All of you. Every brilliant, stubborn, beautiful part of you." She pulled him into her arms and held on tight, letting herself be held in return, letting herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she had finally found someone who saw her whole instead of in pieces. They made up that night with kisses and whispered apologies and promises to do better. But the fight had opened something between them, a deeper level of vulnerability that neither had been willing to access before. The next morning, over coffee that was too strong and toast that was slightly burned, Garrett signed the words that changed everything. "I love you. I did not plan to say it again so soon, but I keep thinking about it. And I want you to know that it was not just something I said because we were fighting. It is true. It has been true for a while." Savannah looked at him across the small kitchen table, at this man who had saved her life, and then kept on saving her every day after. She thought about all the men who had told her they loved her, and then walked away when loving her became inconvenient. She thought about the walls she had built to protect herself from that kind of pain. And then she thought about how those walls had already crumbled, how she was standing in the rubble without any protection, how her heart was completely exposed and terrifyingly vulnerable. "I love you too," she sighed, and the words felt like jumping off a cliff and hoping someone would catch her. "I have been afraid to say it, afraid that if I put it into words, it would become real enough to hurt when it disappeared." "I am not disappearing," Garrett promised. "You and Lily are my whole world now. There is nowhere else I want to be." "What about Rachel?" The question came out before she could stop it, and she immediately wished she could take it back. But Garrett did not flinch. "Rachel will always be part of my heart. She gave me Lily. She taught me what love could be. I will never stop honoring her memory." He paused, making sure Savannah was watching his hands. "But loving you does not diminish what I had with her. My heart did not have to shrink to make room for you. It grew. It expanded. There is a space for grief and joy, for memory and hope, for what was and what could be." Savannah felt tears rolling down her cheeks again. But these were different tears, happy tears, the kind she had almost forgotten how to cry. "I want to be part of Lily's life forever," she signed the words coming from somewhere deep inside her. "Not just as her teacher, not just as your girlfriend. I want to watch her grow up. I want to be there for her first day of school and her first heartbreak and her graduation and all the moments in between. I want to be her family." Garrett pulled her into his arms, and she felt his heart pounding against her cheek, felt the warmth of him surrounding her like the safest place in the world. "You already are," he signed against her, back where she could feel the movement of his hands. "You have been family since the moment you walked into that cafe." 4 months after that terrifying night at Brennan's Corner Cafe, the trial date finally arrived. Derek Vance would face justice for what he had done, for the 3 weeks of terror he had inflicted, for the 2 other women who had been too scared to pursue charges for the predator he had become in the shadows of ordinary life. Savannah sat in the witness waiting room of the Ashford County Courthouse, her stomach tied in knots, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had gone white. She was wearing a simple gray dress that made her feel professional and invisible, a far cry from the red dress that Derek had stalked through the autumn streets. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and her face was carefully composed. But inside, she was screaming. She would have to face him today. Sit in that witness box and look at the man who had hunted her, terrorized her, made her feel like prey. She would have to describe the fear, the helplessness, the desperate moments when no one could understand her cries for help. She would have to be vulnerable in front of a room full of strangers who would judge whether her terror was real enough, serious enough, worthy of justice. Garrett sat beside her, having taken the day off work to be there. His brother Connor had flown in from Washington, D.C., dignified and powerful in his professor's demeanor, determined to show support for the woman who had become family. Lily was safely at home with Garrett's mother, went from the ugliness of courtrooms and criminals. "You can do this," Connor signed when the bailiff came to escort Savannah into the courtroom. "You are not a victim today. You are a warrior. Show them who you really are." Savannah nodded, drew a deep breath, and walked through the doors to face her monster. The courtroom was smaller than she had expected, more intimate, which somehow made it worse. Derek Vance sat at the defendant's table in an orange jumpsuit. His expensive confidence stripped away, his predator's smile replaced by something sullen and resentful. When she walked in, his eyes locked onto her, and she felt the familiar chill of his attention crawling across her skin. But this time, she did not look away. She took the witness stand with the ASL interpreter beside her, a professional woman named Janet, who had been doing this work for decades. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Victoria Chen, approached with a kind expression and began the careful process of walking Savannah through her testimony. She described the first time she had noticed Derek following her, the notes on her car, the shadows outside her window, the growing certainty that she was being hunted by someone who knew exactly how vulnerable she was. She described that terrible night, the grocery store, and the empty streets, and the desperate failed attempts to communicate her terror. She described bursting into the cafe, moving from table to table, watching hope die in strangers' eyes over and over. And she described Garrett, the man who had understood her, who had stepped between her and danger, who had saved her life simply by seeing her when no one else would. The defense attorney, a slick man named Henderson, who seemed to relish his role as protector of predators, approached for cross-examination with a condescending smile. "Miss Blake, you claim my client was stalking you, but you never actually heard him say anything threatening. Did you?" Savannah felt the familiar frustration building in her chest, the assumption that her deafness made her testimony less reliable. "I did not need to hear him," she signed, and Janet translated with the same fierce clarity. "I saw him. I saw him every day for 3 weeks. I saw him follow me home. I saw him watch my apartment. I saw the notes he left on my car. I saw his face in this cafe that night, and I saw the hatred in his eyes when he was arrested. But surely a hearing witness would have been able to confirm. Deaf people see everything." Savannah interrupted, her hands moving with passionate emphasis. "We have to. Our survival depends on it. I may not have heard his footsteps, but I felt the vibrations of the floor when he got close. I may not have heard his breathing, but I saw the fog he left on my window when he stood outside. I may not have heard his voice, but I read his intentions on his face as clearly as you read words on a page." The jury was watching her with rapt attention. This was not the confused, helpless woman they might have expected. This was someone fierce and articulate, and absolutely certain of what she had experienced. Henderson tried a few more questions, attempting to poke holes in her story, but Savannah had truth on her side, and truth was a weapon that could not be deflected. When she finally stepped down from the stand, she walked past Derek Vance without flinching. His eyes burned into her, but she held her head high and kept walking, kept moving forward, kept refusing to be his victim for 1 second longer. The verdict came after only 2 hours of deliberation, guilty on all counts. Derek Vance was sentenced to 6 years in state prison with an additional 10-year restraining order upon release. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s, delivered the sentence with particular emphasis on the calculated nature of his crimes, targeting a deaf woman, specifically because he believed she would be unable to seek help. "You exploited vulnerability with predatory intent," she told him, her voice carrying across the silent courtroom. "The law exists specifically to protect people from those who would prey upon them, and this court will not hesitate to enforce that protection." As the bailiffs led Derek away in handcuffs, he twisted to look at Savannah one final time. The hatred was still there, burning in his eyes, but it was impotent now, caged by the consequences of his own actions. He had chosen to be a predator, and now he would pay the price. Savannah watched him disappear through the door and felt something release in her chest, a tension she had been carrying since that first day at the coffee shop, when she had not known she was being watched. The chapter of terror was finally completely closed. Outside the courthouse, a small crowd of reporters had gathered, drawn by the unusual circumstances of the case and the advocacy angle that made for compelling headlines. Camera flashes went off as Savannah emerged with Garrett and Connor flanking her. But she declined most interviews, not wanting her life to become a spectacle. She did make one statement, though, through Janet the interpreter, standing on the courthouse steps with the autumn sun warm on her face. "Derek Vance chose me because he thought my deafness made me weak," she said, her hands moving with calm authority. "He was wrong. I am here today because of the courage of strangers who became family. To anyone else being stalked, being hunted, being told they are easy prey, you are not alone. You are not weak. And there are people who will fight for you." Then she walked away from the cameras, from the questions from the chapter of her life that she was finally ready to close. That night in Garrett's house, with Lily jumping up and down with excitement and a homemade banner reading "We love you, Miss Savannah" hanging crookedly on the wall. She felt something she had been afraid to feel for a very long time. Complete peace. The monster was gone, and her new life was finally ready to begin. 1 year after that terrifying night in the cafe, Garrett brought Savannah and Lily back to Brennan's Corner Cafe. It was autumn again, the streets painted in amber and gold, the air crisp with the promise of change. The same table by the window was available, as if it had been waiting for them, and they slid into their seats with the easy familiarity of family. Lily, now 5 years old, with sparkly hearing aids she had decorated herself and called her magic ears, ordered chicken nuggets, arranged in a smiley face, just like that first night. But there was no fear, now. No panic, no desperation. Just 3 people who had found each other against all odds and had chosen to keep finding each other every day since. What Savannah did not know was that Lily had been practicing something for weeks. Garrett had taught her a specific sequence of signs, had made her rehearse them, until they were perfect, had sworn her to secrecy with the solemnity that only a 5-year-old could muster. "Miss Savannah," Lily said suddenly, tugging at her sleeve with barely contained excitement. "Can I say something to you in sign language? I practiced really, really hard, and I want it to be perfect." Savannah smiled at this precious child, who had become her daughter in every way that mattered. "Of course, sweetheart. Show me what you learned." Lily turned to face her directly, her small face scrunched with concentration, her hands forming signs with the careful deliberation of someone who wanted every gesture to be exactly right. Thank you for teaching me. I am not scared anymore. I love you." Savannah felt tears spring to her eyes. Every word was perfect, every sign clear and confident. But Lily was not done. Also, she continued, her face splitting into a grin that she clearly could not contain. "Any longer, Daddy has a question." Savannah turned to find Garrett no longer sitting in his seat. He was kneeling beside her chair, a small velvet box in his trembling hands. His eyes bright with tears. He was not trying to hide. 1 year ago, he signed his movements slow and deliberate so she would not miss a single word. You burst through those doors, terrified and alone. I thought I was saving you, but the truth is you saved us. The cafe around them had gone quiet. Stephanie, who still worked here, and who had been secretly informed of tonight's plan, was pressing both hands to her mouth, tears streaming down her cheeks. "You gave Lily a bridge to her new world," Garrett continued. "You gave me hope when I had forgotten what hope felt like. You showed both of us that family is not about blood or even words. It is about understanding. It is about showing up. It is about love." He opened the box, revealing a simple diamond ring that caught the cafe's warm light and scattered it in tiny rainbows. "Savannah Blake. Will you marry us? Will you be my wife and Lily's mother? Will you let us spend the rest of our lives showing you how much you are loved?" Lily was bouncing in her seat, barely able to contain herself. "Say yes. Say yes. Say yes," she signed frantically, having clearly reached the limits of her patience with the adult pace of romantic moments. Savannah looked at this man, this father, this hero who had seen her when she was invisible and had never stopped seeing her since. She looked at this child who had become her daughter, who was signing with confident hands that Savannah had helped shape, who was facing her future without fear, because she knew she would never face it alone. She looked at the cafe around them, at the strangers who were watching with misty eyes at Stephanie behind the counter, and the elderly couple at the next table, and all the witnesses to this moment that had grown from terror into something beautiful. Yes, she signed and then signed it again, because once did not feel like enough. Yes to all of it. Yes, forever. Garrett slipped the ring onto her finger with hands that shook with joy. They kissed while Lily squeezed between them, demanding to be included in the celebration. The entire cafe erupted in applause, and somewhere in the kitchen someone was probably burning something, because the cook had abandoned his post to watch. 3 people who had found each other in the darkness. 3 people who had chosen to walk into the light together. A family finally complete. The wedding was held 6 months later in the garden of the Tennessee School for the Deaf, where Savannah had spent her formative years, learning that her silence was not a limitation, but simply a different way of being in the world. The spring flowers were in full bloom, the air sweet with their perfume, and every chair was filled with people who spoke both languages. Savannah's parents sat in the front row, their hands moving in constant commentary throughout the ceremony, clearly determined to miss nothing. Connor served as best man, his signs eloquent with decades of practice, his presence a reminder of the bridge that had always existed between Garrett's world and Savannah's. Lily was the flower girl, of course. She walked down the aisle in a white dress with sparkly shoes that matched her sparkly hearing aids, carrying a basket of rose petals that she scattered with enthusiasm and absolutely no regard for the careful pattern the wedding planner had demonstrated. She signed, "I love you" to every guest she passed, and by the time she reached the front half, the audience was already crying. The ceremony was conducted entirely in ASL, with a spoken interpreter for the hearing guests, who had not yet learned the language of hands. When the officiant asked if anyone objected, Lily raised her hand, with the dramatic timing of a natural performer. "I object," she signed, causing a ripple of confusion through the crowd. To what sweetheart, the officiant asked, clearly not having anticipated this development. "I object to how long this is taking," Lily signed emphatically. "Can they kiss already?" "We have been practicing for months." The garden exploded with laughter, and Garrett pulled his daughter into a hug while mouthing sorry to the officiant who was trying not to laugh herself. "I think we can speed things up," she said, composing herself. "Do you, Garrett Hayes, take Savannah Blake to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do," Garrett signed and spoke at the same time. "And do you, Savannah Blake, take Garrett Hayes to be your lawfully wedded husband?" To Savannah signed her hand, steady and certain. "Then by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Garrett pulled Savannah into his arms and kissed her like they were the only two people in the world. Lily immediately squeezed between them, demanding to be lifted up and included. And the three of them stood there, a tangle of arms and joy and family, while applause rose around them like a blessing. Later, during the reception, Garrett gave a toast that made even the most stoic guests reach for tissues. 1 year ago, a woman walked into a cafe signing desperately to strangers who could not understand. I was the lucky one who could. I thought I was saving her, but the truth is much more beautiful than that. She saved me from a grief I could not escape. She saved Lily from facing her future alone. She saved our little family from the darkness that had been closing in from all sides." He raised his glass, his other hand forming the sign for love. "To Savannah, my wife, my partner, my home. Thank you for walking into that cafe. Thank you for letting me understand you. Thank you for making us whole." The garden echoed with the sound of glasses clinking and hands moving in applause. And Savannah, surrounded by the people she loved, finally understood what home really meant. Their house in Ashford had become the warmest home on the street, filled with noise that had nothing to do with sound and everything to do with love. Lily, now 8 years old and completely deaf, was thriving in ways that would have seemed impossible on that terrible day in the audiologist's office. She was top of her class at the school for the deaf, surrounded by friends who spoke her language, confident and fierce and utterly unafraid of the silent world she inhabited. And she had a little brother, 2-year-old baby Jacob, who had inherited his father's hearing, but was being raised bilingual from birth, already knew the signs for Mama and Dada, and Cookie, and more. In this house, everyone spoke with their hands as easily as with their voices, and the lines between the hearing and deaf worlds had blurred into something beautiful and new. On a quiet evening, Savannah tucked Lily into bed, while Jacob slept in the nursery down the hall. Lily was tired from a full day of school and play, but she fought sleep with the determination that characterized everything she did. "Mom," she signed sleepily, her hands heavy with exhaustion. "Do you remember when you were scared of the bad man?" Savannah's heart clenched. They rarely talked about Derek Vance anymore, that chapter so thoroughly closed that it sometimes felt like it had happened to someone else. "I remember," she signed back. "I am glad you found Daddy. I am glad you found us." Lily's eyes were closing now, her signs becoming slower and less precise. "You were the best thing that ever happened to our family." Savannah kissed her daughter's forehead, feeling tears prick at the corners of her eyes. "No, sweetheart," she signed against Lily's small hand. "You were the best thing that ever happened to me." Downstairs, Garrett was rocking Jacob to sleep, the baby's small head resting against his shoulder. When Savannah appeared in the doorway, he looked up with the smile that still made her heart skip after all these years. "Everyone okay?" He signed with his free hand. She looked at her husband, at her sleeping son, at the photos of their family, covering every wall. She thought about that terrified woman in the red dress, signing desperately to strangers who could not understand, running out of hope and options on a cold autumn night. That woman had found her voice in the language of hands. She had found her home in the arms of a man who understood. She had found her family in the most unexpected place, with the most unexpected people in the most unexpected way. "Everyone is perfect," she signed back. And it was true. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that the darkest moments can lead to the most beautiful connections, please take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that they are never truly alone, that understanding can come from the most unexpected places, and that sometimes the people we are meant to find are the ones we meet when we are at our most vulnerable. Your support means the world to us and helps us continue bringing these stories to you. Thank you for being here, and we will see you in the next story.